This is Sony's Xperia 10 Mark V, a compact mid-ranger that has some of the best battery life we've seen on this channel. But besides the battery, what else is this phone all about? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our Xperia 10 Mark V review. The Xperia 10 Mark V is a new phone from Sony that stands out from the mid-range crowd with its unique form factor and focus on battery life. Not a ton has changed since the previous model. Sony is sticking to the same mold here, but at least you get stereo speakers and a new main camera. Another difference is that the Xperia 10 Mark V's display is very slightly bigger than the Mark IV's by 0.1 inches. This means that the phone is overall a bit larger, but somehow it's even lighter than last year at just 159 grams. It's relatively tall and thin because of the display's tall aspect ratio. Both the back and the frame are again made of plastic. Like last year's model, the Mark V brings ingress protection, rated at IP65/IP68, something you don't find often in the mid-range. The display of the phone is a 6.1-inch OLED with a 1080p resolution, a tall 21:9 aspect ratio, and Gorilla Glass Victus protection. Sony hasn't increased the refresh rate here, it's again just 60 Hz, and you miss out on the extra smoothness that high refresh rate competitors can offer. The max brightness though is improved and very good. We measured up to around 620 nits with the manual slider, and this can boost up to almost 950 nits in auto mode when in the sun. There are some other nice features here as well. The panel is quite contrasty, being an OLED, and there's support for HDR video and 10-bit color depth. And the color accuracy can be good, depending on the color settings you choose. Like last year, you get a 3.5mm jack for headphones. But instead of a single speaker, the Mark V has front-facing stereo speakers. They have good loudness, and the sound is clean, with nice mids and highs. You can wake up and unlock the phone with a side-mounted fingerprint reader built into the power button. It's not the fastest fingerprint reader around. And the Xperia 10 Mark V comes with 128 gigs of storage on board, and that is expandable through microSD. The interface of the phone is pretty much stock Android 13, with a handful of Sony features on top. From the home screen and notification shade, you won't see much of anything other than what Google intended. Several of the proprietary features you'd find on the more expensive flagship model are missing here, including the custom camera apps and the game enhancer. There's no always-on display either. You do get the multi-window switch though. It's basically two task switchers stacked on top of one another, meant for navigating between and opening apps in split-screen mode. SideSense is another of the in-house Sony features. A handle on the side of the phone opens up a menu of shortcuts to apps and features, most of it customizable. Now we're onto the Xperia 10 Mark V's chipset performance, which honestly is lackluster. The chipset is a Snapdragon 695 5G, just like in last year's model, but even back then the performance fell behind the competition. Nowadays that gap is even larger. And it's not even just about benchmarks. In your day-to-day tasks, it's common to run into some slowdowns and stutters. The thermal management seen during our prolonged stress tests leaves a lot to be desired too. These dips and spikes can lead to issues while gaming. At least this chipset is quite power efficient, and together with a 5000 mAh battery, helps to provide some of the best battery life we've seen on a phone yet. In our proprietary battery tests, the Xperia 10 Mark V earned an incredible endurance rating of 175 hours. You don't get a charger in the box, or much of anything else besides the phone. With a proper adapter, we were able to charge the phone from 0 to 37% in half an hour, which is quite unimpressive. Now we're onto the cameras, which include a new 48-megapixel main cam, an 8-megapixel 2x telephoto zoom, and an 8-megapixel ultrawide cam. Because of pixel binning, the main cam captures 12-megapixel photos by default. The quality is decent. The detail is good, with a pretty natural rendition, and the colors are natural as well, though a bit muted. Dynamic range is generally good. Portrait shots aren't too bad, with adequate subject separation. In low light, the quality is alright, but fails to impress considering the new main cam's larger sensor. The photos come out rather underexposed, with dark shadows. At least the light sources are handled well, and there's plenty of detail and very little noise. Enabling night shooting mode does have a small but noticeable effect, brightening up the shadows and the frame overall. A bit more sharpening is applied too. Because of limitations from the chipset, the Xperia 10 Mark V maxes out at 1080p for video recording. This sort of video from the main cam has okay dynamic range and saturated colors. The detail level isn't great, and there is some noise. Now on to the telephoto cam. Its 2x zoomed photos are nicely sharp and detailed. The dynamic range is good too. The color rendition is noticeably different from the main cams. In low light, the telephoto cam captures good detail with natural looking colors and okay dynamic range. Just like the main cam though, the photos are underexposed with dark shadows. The night shooting mode helps the telephoto quite a bit, brightening things up, reducing noise, and adding sharpening. 1080p zoomed videos are decent. The detail level isn't great, but seems to be more than the main cam at least. The colors are pretty close to the main cams as well. And now the ultrawide. Its 8-megapixel photos are good for this sort of camera. There's a decent level of detail and good dynamic range, and the colors match the main cams well. In low light, the ultrawide's photos are okay. There's a decent level of detail, and the exposure seems to be a bit brighter than the other two cameras. Still, shadows are dark, and light sources are blown out. Night shooting mode brightens things up further and helps contain the light sources, and these photos don't look quite as soft. Videos from the ultrawide cam have a relatively low level of detail, and the dynamic range isn't the widest. The colors don't match the other cameras, and these videos are also rather noisy. Electronic stabilization is available across all cameras, and it does a great job of smoothing out bumps and shakes. Finally, the 8-megapixel selfies have plenty of detail, and colors look natural. The dynamic range is reasonably wide, and exposure is dependable. So that's the Xperia 10 Mark V. Just like last year, you get a well-built compact mid-ranger with killer battery life, but this time around the battery life is even better, and you get stereo speakers and a brighter screen. Compared to other mid-rangers in this price range though, you are missing a high refresh rate on that screen, and there are definitely more powerful options out there when it comes to the chipset. But if those things don't bother you, then the Xperia 10 Mark V could be worth checking out. Thanks for watching guys. If you'd like to see some alternatives to the Xperia 10 Mark V, one option could be the Samsung Galaxy A54, or you could have a look at the Google Pixel 6a. Let us know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.